Here we are, our Sugar Shift Challenge call, September 23rd, 2025. So, one of the things I wanted to share was this Dark Horse podcast interview with a dentist and dental researcher who was talking about the oral microbiome. But the broader microbiome and how humans have evolved with these different microbes from animals. We've shared with them, they've shared with us, and the different mechanisms of those. But he was talking about how when we were back living in the caves, I guess we used to eat these tubers, these big tubers, and they had a lot of xylitol, mannitol, and ribitol. And I guess other animals don't use those, but our microbes in our gut can use those. And so anyway, he was talking about xylitol in pregnancy and how the mother's microbiome can impact preterm births and all these health issues with babies, and streptococcus mutans being one of those species that's problematic and is passed from mother to child, and how to kind of address that. And he was talking about xylitol gum, and they had a study that showed that women who had chewed this xylitol gum during their pregnancy had actually significantly lowered the incidence of preterm birth. And it was because of the alteration of this oral microbiome. And, of course, in my Parkinson's work, I've also looked at oral microbes, and streptococcus being one of those. We found the oral pathogen porphyromonas in the gut of people with Parkinson's. And, so we talk about oral health here a lot, but kind of the epiphany from this xylitol discussion was that pathogenic bacteria can't use that xylitol as a carbon source for growth like they can use glucose and fructose. And the same is actually true of mannitol. So I went and did some research looking into that. And so glucose and fructose, I mean, I've talked about before in our earliest study with John's data that, there was elevated streptococcus in his gut. And then when he took the sugar shift, the streptococcus nearly went to zero. And streptococcus really likes glucose. So in kind of digging into some of the research, essentially I found that a lot of the pathogens like Staph aureus, and I should try to pull that up. I'll pull that up in a minute. But a number of these pathogenic bacteria cannot use mannitol to grow. But our good bacteria, our bifidobacteria and lactobacillus, can use mannitol to grow, which of course in fermented foods, though, the leuconostoc and the bacillus subtilis are mannitol producers, and reuteri is a mannitol producer. So those are converting those sugars that the pathogens prefer. They're converting them and taking them away from those pathogens and turning them into a sugar that these better bacteria can eat. So that was kind of an epiphany for me. I have not finished listening to it. There's like another 30 minutes to the podcast, but it was really interesting, the discussion about how, we've evolved with the microbes, and also, the importance of, a mother who is colonized by certain oral pathogens, trying to be mindful of not passing those along to the child, and the issues that that can have. So that was kind of an interesting find for this week for me. I've also, here, I'm just going to pin myself for a minute. Not that I need to be pinned, but Okay. So, that was an interesting finding. Also, a few weeks ago, I had talked about trying to find this book that I was going to do for the book club. I don't know, I've got the fuzzy on the background, the microbial blueprint. And I had the hardest time finding this book. And I thought, well, it must be full of all these secrets that I don't already know if it's this hard to find. But I finally got it this week after ordering it about a month ago. And I'm happy to report that there was nothing in the book that I didn't already know. So it's not full of any, great secrets, but it was a nice, goes into a lot of the details around how the research is done and how sequencing is done. And, it's a pretty user-friendly book if you can find it. But you're certainly not missing out if you can't find it. So, that was another find from this week. I had hoped to have Alan Lewis with Natural Grocers with us tonight to talk again about some of the things that are going on to try to improve things in the food supply and the things that he's been working on, but he's at a conference and wasn't able to join us. So I thought I would start by answering questions for people, and then I actually have a very old presentation that I put together after John and I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro back in 2011 with a group of 28 people. So there were 10 people with multiple sclerosis. There were 4 people with Parkinson's, and each person was paired with a healthy climber as their partner. And 21 out of 27 of us made it to the top. And of the 7 who didn't make it, 4 of those were healthy people. And I put together a little presentation in part about, when we set a goal for ourselves, and the little presentation is about perspective and how your perspective changes as you kind of move along the path. So, why don't we start? If anybody's got specific questions, I can answer. And then if not, I'll do that little presentation and we can talk about that. Hello, Paula? Oh, you're on mute, honey. You got to unmute.
Sorry. Hi, how are you? So, well, I'm waiting for your conference to start. I'm very excited about it. And I actually even asked a question over there. And the question was about the amount of carbohydrates that we should consume daily, and what is people's opinion on this. And because it's changing with time, I feel it. And I have my view on it, which is different than everybody's, probably, whatever. It's something between the take 300 grams or take 15 grams carbs. So I basically started eating. Bella. Okay, hold on a second. Sorry, my husband will take care of it. There is a rabbit outside of the window, and when we have a rabbit outside of the window, everybody is very excited.
Yes.
So the question is, what is the golden gate for that in people's opinion, and how people are living those days? Like I said, I started eating fruits often, and I do not see any raise of my blood glucose. And Plum, can you take her away, please? So I'm not sure. Maybe in the long run there will be change. Maybe my triglycerides will go up it will be interesting to see in about 6 months how is that going. And I even started eating a little bit of rice, white rice. So all those things kind of were suggested by Dr. Marcola, in the book that we
Right.
were talking about last time. But the main question that I have is how to live life with the minimum inflammation. That's my problem. So maybe people have some answer on this subject or not. And the thing that I discovered, not yet, but I started looking at is aspirin. So I wonder, my question actually towards you is, have you researched taking aspirin, not baby aspirin, a regular amount, like a 300 milligrams, 325, one tablet, fast relief aspirin per day? Because it looks like the research doesn't show that aspirin is any harmful to anything. It's like a myth that we had with the statins. It looks like the aspirin myth is something similar to. Maybe different. So I'm going to start researching more and more on the subject. But some people suggest that if you take after your 50s a tablet of aspirin per day, not the baby aspirin, because for some reason the baby aspirin is kind of it's anticoagulant. But if you take a normal amount, like a 300 milligrams of fast relief aspirin, it's kind of bounding with your stuff. This is what I had to research. I cannot tell you more how exactly works, but it seems like it's beneficial. And I was wondering, maybe it will be beneficial for my low-grade inflammation on arthritis.
So I'm by no means an expert on aspirin. What I can say is, aspirin came from the willow, I think willow bark. And
Yes.
in my opinion, the actual natural basis of the origin of these synthetic drugs is probably a better alternative. But what I will say is, at the conference I attended this past weekend, I met a woman who she has a company that makes teas, and she has a turmeric based tea. She's been going to basically orthopedic offices and giving them a protocol using turmeric as an anti-inflammatory. I mean, I think it is important to know your source of your turmeric, but I think turmeric might be a better anti-inflammatory option.
I do take turmeric, and there are benefits of turmeric, but it's a different thing. So
because you're talking about the blood coagulation, which and there are a lot of different things that can thin the blood as well, including microbial proteases. So natto and nattokinase that comes from Bacillus subtilis and some of the Bacillus strains is also an anticoagulant. So that's another thing to look at and think about as your microbiome health and what you're how you're using the microbes. But I think the history has been that those larger doses of aspirin can irritate the stomach. If you had a enteric coated one, maybe not. But if they irritate the stomach and then you get bleeding, you will have pathogenic bacteria that feed on blood will grow. And so that's something also to be mindful of. But I want to back up to your first question about carbohydrates. And I want to back up to that in the context of everybody who's looking for the perfect diet, and all these experts out here, eat carnivore, eat keto, eat low carb, eat high carb, eat only vegetables. Well, so I want to share with you, I'm working on a project with Dr. Ninham and a nonprofit in Australia that is focused on the health problems of the indigenous people of the Northern Territories of Australia. And they have a terrible burden of heart disease and diabetes. And we're actually looking at doing a little project with them with Sugar Shift and Revasca, which helps feed the glycocalyx, this fuzzy layer that surrounds all our cells, our gut lining, our blood-brain barrier. And
what is Revasca?
I'm sorry?
What is Revasca, you said?
Revasca is a product that's made of, it has some polyphenols, it has interleaf aloe vera, it has a seaweed, and Chris can probably tell you better than I can. But I mean, basically that glycocalyx is a sulfated polymer. So the seaweed and the aloe vera help feed that. The polyphenols are there for antioxidants. And it has two enzymes, catalase and SOD, that are also very important for antioxidant. And so that's helping to feed the glycocalyx. And when it's Chris's turn to talk, she can tell a little bit of a story of their experience with the Revasca. But in the, after the first meeting we had with the team to talk about this, I went back to look at, what is the, we talk about ancestral diets, and I think a lot of people think in terms of paleo, that, it's like the caveman out killing the animal, and it was only an animal-based diet or a very limited diet. But if you look at the diet of the Northern Australian Aborigines, they had animal food. So they were eating marine foods that were along the coasts and in the rivers. So they relied heavily on fish, shellfish, something called a sea cow, and sea turtles. And so I'm sure those were very collagen rich. They had terrestrial game. So they had kangaroos and wallabies and these big lizards and possums and emus. They also ate snakes and insects, and insect larvae, which we're probably not going to do, but they ate a lot of plant foods. So back to those tubers that I was talking about with xylitol, mannitol, and ribitol. So they ate a lot of roots and tubers, seeds and nuts. They had fruits, these bush plums and cacadu plums that are very high in vitamin C. They had wild bananas and figs and, wild greens in the water areas. They do have a lot of desert. So they had honey and nectar. And a lot of their plants required some form of detoxification. So they had to soak them to leach out the toxins. But of course, when you're doing that, you're also kind of fermenting them with the natural microbes. And so they've moved very far away from that diet, but it was also a very seasonal diet. So they had
But did they have at the time the high blood pressure, blood cholesterol? No, not cholesterol.
No, none of that.
The diabetes. So when they were eating all those foods, they were healthy, you're saying?
They were healthy, and they had a wet season diet, and they had a dry season diet. So, when I think about these things now, when we talk about ancestral diets, I'm like, well, okay, what's your ancestry? Because if your ancestry came from the desert in the Middle East, or from Northern Australia, or from, the Western United States, or from Ireland, because I thought about this a lot with John when I was trying to kind of think, okay, what would an ancestral diet be for someone whose ancestors came from the British Isles and Northern Europe? Like, what are those people eating? Because when you talk about ancestral diet, you have a different ancestry than I have. And I think that's really missed in this conversation, is understanding that there may be some people whose constitution and ancestry requires a higher carbohydrate diet. And there are some people whose constitution and ancestry leans more to a higher protein, lower carbohydrate mix. And I think that's something that we're missing. And then we're also really missing that connection and understanding to what we've done to so many of our carbohydrates. So the way we have changed the way we grow our food, the chemicals that are used on them, the intensity of what we're trying to speed up the growth or enhance the growth, the things that we do, and how that alters the content of that. So I had a conversation a few weeks ago, or after, I think I was reading an article that was talking about fruit. So fruits and vegetables are often picked in the green state to ship to market and allowed to ripen off the vine. Well, a fruit or a vegetable that is ripened off the vine may get the color, but the actual mix of the carbohydrates doesn't get the full change of the profile that it would get if it were ripened on the vine. And so
definitely.
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm really starting to think more about how, food is information for us where we live, and having local food and eating what's local is very important information to us. And, I know you're in Florida some of the time, and I forget where else you are, but,
Indiana. Yeah.
When you're in Florida,
Very different.
yeah,
Very different.
It's very different. It's different information. And so for me, I'm really starting to think about that in the context of how and what I eat, in terms of what is the season? What should I be eating?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And also, I do order Bulgarian food because it feels right, kind of. I don't know if it will make a difference, but for sure, I'm not born to eat corn, or corn syrup, or corn starch, or corn, whatever corn, or avocado.
Right.
But I'm eating mayo with avocado because I don't know why. But
Because
I'm not
somebody
born
said
to
it
do
was
it.
healthier.
Yeah,
But,
exactly.
So, and avocados aren't necessarily healthier. I had a lengthy conversation with a gentleman with Parkinson's who was an avocado farmer, who was pretty sure that the chemicals he used on his avocados was one of the contributors to his Parkinson's. So, anyway, so like,
Gotcha.
is Dr. Mercola's, 500 grams a day of carbohydrates? That's probably not the answer. Certainly not the answer for
50 to
everybody.
300, but yeah, I think it's very personal, but I kind of agree with him that I don't feel like I should avoid fruits. I simply don't feel it. I don't know if I'm right, if I'm wrong. We'll see. And if I'm diabetic, probably I will think harder on the problem, but I'm not. So why to kind of restrict myself of eating those fruits that I've been born eating. And I don't
Yeah,
know.
I mean,
They have the vitamins. Why take fake
right.
vitamins instead of taking
Yeah.
vitamin C from
Eat your vitamins.
kiwi?
So, I mean, I eat fruit, but I am really starting to focus on eating the fruit that is in season. And I think that's one of the problems we have with our global food supply is you could have a strawberry 365 days a year, but that's not when
No.
strawberries grow. Yeah. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, I just want to say that I made the what is this? The red
Beet
thing.
kebab?
The kwas, yeah, the kwas like you did, but I probably put a lot of bacteria, but my bacteria was mixed, wasn't only from everything. I mean, but it's delicious. Who cares,
Oh,
right?
from your whey? The way
Yeah,
that
the way is
yeah,
from
I
all
don't
my
think it matters.
yogurts that I've collected.
I do that too. It's like different. I have all these jars of whey
Yeah,
refrigerator and
but it's really delicious. The only point is it's very messy. How do you take it from the jar without messing up everything?
well, I don't eat. I mean, I just pour the juice out and drink the juice, and
You
then when
don't eat the
get
fruit?
done, I eat the beets when I get to the bottom, and I make a new jar.
With the same bits?
No, I cut up a new beet.
Yeah, I separated them. Oh, I shouldn't separate it. You think?
Well, I
I
mean,
should have kept it.
you can separate them if you want to, but I just leave them in there, and I drink my shot of beet kvass, and then when I'm down to the bottom of the jar, then I take the beets out. And
No, I eat them with my meals, and I drink the kawas, like you pronounce it in the morning. Yeah, thank you for this recipe. It's delicious. Thank you.
you're welcome. I think Jen is next, and then Chris. Are you there, Jen?
Yeah. Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
Do I see me? Oh
Yep,
my gosh.
I see
Okay.
you.
I'm on a different computer, so it's all weird. Okay. I really just quickly, because I know Chris has a question, but I just quickly want to reply to Paula's comment about the aspirin. I learned firsthand, or I suppose secondhand. My husband had a medical emergency last year. And I know, Martha, I've told you this story, so sorry for the repetition. I'll be really quick. He had a GI bleed, of all things, and lost so much blood. I didn't know it. He was losing blood in his bowel movements, and I didn't know. Obviously, I'm not looking. But over time, he ended up having an emergency where not a doctor here, I thought he was dehydrated. And it was also during a cold and flu time here. Everybody was sick with tummy stuff. So we thought he had some sort of viral illness, and he was getting more and more dehydrated. Meanwhile, what was really happening was that he was losing blood. And had I checked his blood pressure, I would have known this. Anyway, we ended up in the ER, then in the ICU for 4 days. At the end of the 4 days, he proposed. This is how I got married a year ago. But so happy ending, but he did every
Were you
single.
saying, Jen, that you took aspirin and this happened to you?
I did not know it, but this is my husband. He had been taking one aspirin a day for over 10 years because we were all told that it's heart healthy, it keeps the blood flowing. And this was advice that was given to his father, not to him. He just started doing it because his dad was doing it.
But baby aspirin on regular one.
My understanding is he was taking regular aspirin. We learned in the ICU that you really should never take aspirin unless it's under a doctor's supervision. So anyway,
Well, that's the fake news. I'm gonna research
lived
it more.
We lived it. I mean, the GI bleed was not, they couldn't catch it if they couldn't see it happening in the moment. So they never saw what caused it, but what they believe is that it was the veins inside of our gut lining, they blow like a varicose vein in your legs. We have varicose veins in our gut, and it's called an AVM for anyone who, wants to look up medicine stuff. So it's like varicose veins in the gut, but his were bleeding out, thin, like too thin. Also, he did bruise very easily, as I thought about it. So that's what we learned. We went
Well,
home with
we don't
zero
know
understanding.
what else he was taking, right?
I do
Maybe
know.
he-
I do know. I mean, nothing else that would have caused a GI bleed. The
Mhm.
aspirin was sort of by eliminating just about everything else under the sun, including the horrible process of a colonoscopy and an endoscopy and, all the nuclear
I have to
medicine.
report because I did very little research, but so far all the research that I've done on the aspirin is fake news for the bleeding part. So I will
I
let
just
you know
would-
more.
I say
Well, I
caution.
just say, I would take this as a warning of caution,
Yeah.
and sort of back to what I said at the beginning. Many of these pharmaceutical options came from plants, and a plant is a whole system. It's not an isolated molecule. And I think the body has a lot more wisdom about what to do with a whole plant-based. And I know there are it's willow bark or white willow. You can find those. So that's something.
Actually, the recommendation is
know.
to take the aspirin. I don't remember the names, but there is a little bit change in the name when you produce the aspirin. It's not exactly the willow bark. It's
Right.
something. There is another molecule
into it.
involved.
They turn them in. Most drugs are what are called two-dimensional molecules, where in a plant, it's a three-dimensional molecule. And so think about the body, our cells, the microbes in our body identifying things. They're going to identify and do something a little different with a three-dimensional molecule than they are a two-dimensional molecule. And I would just say,
We'll see.
I think
It is the
always
big pharma
a good idea
again.
to be cautious with doing anything every single day.
Yeah, this is what happens with, actually, it's not recommended every single day, but we'll talk about this more another time. I don't want to bother you. The problem is that I believe that the big pharma again stepped in and took bare aspirin, the one that I used to take when I was a child or whatever, when I was in Europe, and it costs couple of pennies,
right? And they send you over to buy Tylenol, which ruins your liver,
right? That kills you, first of all, and second of all, kills your babies. But not only this, they kind of use it in a big amount, so this will provoke probably bleeding, I don't know, and not feeling good. But I will do more research. But I believe that big pharma played with the aspirin like it did with so many other simple things.
They play with everything. So Chris?
Yeah. Okay, you and I had the beginning of a discussion about ancestral diets maybe about a month ago, and I think you were just starting to investigate, okay, who are your ancestors? We have different ancestors. Makes so much sense. I usually say that the dietary recommendations that I make are based on an ancestral diet, and this is what that means to me. Here's Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, Weston A. Price, and I know Jen and you know about this, and maybe others don't. It's pretty interesting. I'm sure I've mentioned it before, but he was a dentist who noticed such great generational differences in his patients when, at a time when food was starting to be industrialized. And I think it was like in the early 1900s to 1940s, maybe, where he was most on the scene with this idea. And he noticed that each subsequent generation in America was having worse and worse dental health. And in terms of bone structure, in terms of things we think about like cavities, and he also noticed that indigenous communities all over the world tended to have much, kind of simply, better smiles, is how he kind of recorded it in the many, many photographs. This is a really fascinating tome. It's big, but
It's
I
a
have
great
such
book.
respect for this man. So he left his job and circled the world with his wife and visited, I think, 12 different indigenous tribes from all over the world. He thought the problem was that we were taking in too much meat. And because meat production was industrialized, people were having more meat. And he thought that was a problem. I mean, unless you were a farmer right on the farm and raised your own. And that's what that was his hypothesis. And he was expecting to find that indigenous groups who had not been affected by Western industrialization of foods, production of foods, would be those that are surviving at this point in time. And the stories are really fascinating. He was disappointed to find out that the tribes who were relying on some form of animal protein were the ones who were surviving. He could not find a tribe that had survived without some type of animal protein. And that was, as you mentioned, Martha, it included insects. And it certainly included fish. And, he, at first disappointed, he followed the path and found that the groups that were completely unaffected by our more modern techniques the generations were following very close with one another. Of course, in many studies of African tribes, but all over. And so what I think is his biggest contribution is more about the macronutrients, and that we need protein and fat and carbohydrates, and that we need some, he definitely believes we need some animal fat, animal proteins, unless we are supplementing. So then I think from there I go with your idea that those ratios change in terms of what our ancestry is. And not too many of us have pure ancestry, but I'm basically Northern European, and that would be very different from somebody who might be from South America or whatever.
Yeah, or equatorial.
Yes, closer to the equator. And so I think it's like a refinement. When I say ancestral, I'm looking at, let's start with macronutrients, all the amazing pre-digestive processes that ancient peoples, or even more modern than ancient, 10,000 years ago, and became more agrarian, the processes that people used to make foods digestible from the earth, and fermenting, soaking, and that's what Weston Price was about and what he discovered. And then I follow the Weston Price community. I know you do too, Martha. I've never really been to one of their
I've been to a couple of their 3 of their annual meetings. Yeah.
Yes. And a lot of what they're talking about is how to return to approaching food from the idea that it needs to be, we sometimes have to do sort of a pre-digestive step in order to break it down and make it something that we can tolerate.
Well, and that, like, people have issues a lot of times with beans or with grains. And so sort of the companion to Weston Price book on nutrition and physical degeneration, Sally Fallon runs the foundation now, and she has a cookbook called Nourishing Traditions.
Yes.
And it really goes into how we used to eat, how foods used to be prepared. And most of the time, grains were soaked.
Yeah.
And they were soaked overnight. They were sometimes soaked for as long as a week. So that is getting rid of sort of native toxins in the plant, whether those are anti-nutrients and that sort of thing. Same thing with beans. And then
nuts as
well.
Seeds. Nuts and seeds.
Yeah. And so when you soak a seed, you're sprouting it, and that's creating enzymes, and those enzymes would also help you digest. And we've moved into this society of fast everything. So even when we're cooking at home, we want it to be fast. We don't want to have to think, okay, I'm going to have beans this week and I need to soak them for 24 or 48 hours or what have you. We've lost those, I'm going to call it food hygiene habits.
Yeah.
Of how to do that. And that Sally Fallon's cookbook is a great resource for that. And I picked up eating a lot of different things that I hadn't eaten before. And my beet kvass recipe came out of that cookbook. And there's a little section, I think, in the back of it called Healing Tonics. It has, like, you wouldn't even think about it, but just like throwing this odd little mixture of vegetables in, and simmering it for an hour or whatever, and the amount of micronutrients like potassium and the trace minerals that you get out of tossing a potato, some green beans, and a couple of other vegetables in the pot, and then drinking that broth. So there are a lot of great ideas, but also I had never eaten buckwheat, and there were some ancestral recipes for having buckwheat and eggs for breakfast, and you soak the buckwheat and then you cook it with your scrambled eggs, and it was delicious. In fact, I've forgotten about that. I might have to try that again.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want to I love your idea of seeing this video, but we don't want to cut off anybody else who wants to ask questions, but I hope we can do both.
I think we can do both. The other thing you reminded me too, on my travel last week, I took this old book. I think I found this book. A friend of mine did house staging, and so she would buy these boxes of old books, and she had this book from 1901 that she let me have, and it's called Strength from Eating. But it's really fascinating because the first chapter of it talks about appetite and how we should never eat if we don't have an appetite. And we have been trained to eat 3 times a day, and, people are eating 3 times a day. And it is, as he said in the book, an insult to the digestive system and the body to keep throwing in food when we don't have appetite. And of course, I go back to sugar and that craving that makes you think you have an appetite, but I don't think it's really a real appetite. So that was the first chapter, was all about appetite and not eating if you're not hungry. So, and I remember as a child, getting you got to clean your plate, and, you had to eat everything that was on your plate. And when I was a child, in my house, we didn't get to fill our own plate. So, we were given a plate with a serving on it and required to eat all of it before we left the table. And, those are, I don't know how much those eating habits are followed today, but sort of back to learning to listen to your body again about whether you're hungry. And, after doing that 30-day reset, I already probably only ate 2 meals a day, but I have found again that I'm often not, if I eat my first meal of the day, say at 10 o'clock in the morning, and then I eat again at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that's all I want. I am not, it's 7:30 now. I ate at about 2:30 this afternoon. And frankly, it was kind of, I would say, a fairly light lunch. I had spaghetti squash, clams, tomatoes, and onions, in some, sauteed in some butter. And that was it. But I'm still full. So that was one of the kind of key things in there. And I think I've talked about this, but this also goes back to Weston Price and the nutrition and degeneration, is we don't chew. The Western diet it's a lot of mushy stuff that's already pre-processed and either doesn't require chewing, and we haven't really been trained to chew. And the chewing is what builds our facial structure.
Mm-hmm.
And in this, he's talking about chewing no matter what you are putting in your mouth, even soup, that you should chew everything there until it is completely liquid, because the digestion process starts in your mouth with all of these enzymes that are produced in your mouth to pre-digest the food going into your stomach. And so
I also like to play with my food. I don't know if you do too. Like, I like crab legs, so I open the crab legs for everybody at the table. And anything, all the seeds, if the seed is not in the shell, I don't eat it. It's not delicious for me. I like the playing, and this makes my appetite working, kind of, and then chewing, of course, and slowly.
So the chewing again was interesting, because in that, the link that I posted for that podcast discussion of the oral microbiome, one of the things he was talking about was a gum from some kind of I want to say a pine tree or something. So it was a gum 10,000 years ago. They were chewing this gum from a tree. So it would have had, plant terpenes and the gums, and I think he said it had xylitol in it. So, 10,000 years ago, they were chewing a very tough gum from a tree. So
not 2,000 years ago, as a child, I was chewing gum from trees in the forest. You know how the tree is crying?
Yep. The pap. That comes out. Yeah.
And this is what we were chewing as a gum.
Yeah, that's actually what mastic gum, one of the brand names is Tears of Chios. But I've purchased mastic gum for jaw strengthening, and it really wears you out. It's tiring. But it's also
Very
great.
much so. And you have to actually don't swallow it at the end. Just spit it out, because when all the juices are gone, it's like you're chewing tree, basically, right?
Oh, so that was also one. This was kind of interesting. So he said, when you're chewing and you're chewing, and you get down to liquid, if there's anything that cannot be liquefied, that you remove it from your mouth.
Okay.
Wow.
So
Well, this
that's
is an
kind of
instinct.
interesting to me, because that's like insoluble fiber, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
That
I
was
know that, yeah.
but it is from 1901, but the advice was it's pretty interesting. And actually I'm going to write a blog about it, because it goes into the nutrition of the different foods. And I'm wondering, like, how different our food is now 125 years later in terms of nutritional content. And that's, I talk about that a lot, that our food is just not as nutritious as it used to be. Okay, so I don't have any more questions right now, so I'm going to do this little presentation.
Okay, hang on to, I'm getting lead
It's
in
a little
here.
off the microbiome, but I think it's relevant because we set our health goals. So I might need to turn my light on because it's getting kind of dark in here. Hang on. We set a health goal, and whether that is, we're sick and we want to get better, or it's we want to lose weight, or we have a business goal or a personal goal, and we set a really high goal or sort of an intermediate goal. We try to go along these different paths, but sometimes you start out, or you look at something as the ideal and you think it's impossible. And so that's one aspect of this, what your perspective is. And then the other aspect I'll talk a little bit more at the end about, which I think is relevant to what we have going on in our society today, because we're all stuck in our own perspective. But I'll talk about that a little bit after and this is not a long presentation at all. It's mostly visuals, but it's also, it reminds me of John. And it was this time last year that we were in the hospital with John, and it will be 1 year later this week of John's passing. And this More Than a Mountain was the name of our group. It was called the More Than a Mountain, Our Leap of Faith, Climb Up Kilimanjaro. And this was also really, I think, a life-changing experience for both John and me, in changing our perspective in many ways, but also changing his perspective about Parkinson's. And that was why Lori Snyder, who put the trip together, she has a nonprofit called Empowerment Through Adventure, and she was the first woman, and maybe still the only woman with multiple sclerosis, to climb all 7 summits after being diagnosed with MS. That's a insurmountable achievement for most people without MS. But she wanted people to know that your adventures are not over with a diagnosis, and you often won't hear that from a neurologist. So part of this was also about, at that time in my life, I was working to make money, and to make as much money as I could. And so it was like, do you live to eat and make money, or do you love what you do? And it really changed my perspective about that. And I now do something that I love to do every day. And I certainly don't make anywhere near the amount of money that I used to make, but I absolutely love what I do. So, and when we take on a challenge, something like Kilimanjaro, or changing completely what we do for a living, that's a big challenge, and it takes us out of our comfort zone where most of us don't like to be, but that's really where we grow. So this is what it looks like from a distance when you're looking at Mount Kilimanjaro. It's 19,400 and something, we'll see at the end, feet. And so, you're way down here when you park, and you're thinking, okay, how am I going to climb that mountain? And this was our team of, our happy little team of misfits. And it was one of the largest groups at that point that had climbed. There is me, and there's John back there. And really, all of these people became lifelong friends of ours, and we've done many more adventures with them. This is our porters. So, I will say a challenge like this requires help. And many of our bigger challenges in life, you have to think about, you don't have to do things alone. So, that's part of why we come together on these challenge calls, is we're supporting each other. And these gentlemen really helped us get up the mountain, because they carried tents and bags and a lot of the heavy stuff, so that we were able to take a much lighter load. And this is how they carried the bags on their heads. It was kind of crazy,
Wow.
but these men were so strong. And you think about, they were climbing this mountain, multiple times a year. But this was also one of our guide, named August, said that it was one of the jobs in his country, Tanzania, that enabled him to send 4 children to college and really transform the lives of his children with their education. So that's just, as we start to move up, we're still kind of down in this lower brushy part where there are trees and stuff. But then you start to move up the mountain, and you can see how your perspective changes. You're up above the clouds. You can't see, it's like the clouds are an ocean. And this is sort of, again, off at a distance. We're trying to get to these tents. And then as we came in here, so this was our second camp, and they are singing for us and cheering us all on. And again, I think about how, whether it's the Sugar Shift Challenge or, our 30-day reset or anything we're trying to do, cheering each other on is a big part of how we encourage each other to accomplish these goals and help each other along the way. And that, again, is, above the cloud ocean, as I like to say. That was one of my favorite views of all. If you think like there's a whole world down below you, you can see it when you're up in an airplane, but the fact that you've climbed above the clouds, it's such an incredible change in your perspective. And this is our little tent here that night, and we will climb all across and kind of switch back around and up to the top. Now there, I think, to me, it doesn't look that ominous, but there's still 4 more days of climbing to get to the top. And this is just some of the trails along the way as we kind of moved across the mountain. This was our longest day. And I think mileage wise, we actually didn't go a long distance every day. I think 8 to 10 miles a day was about the length of the daily hike, but they had this phrase that they would say to us, "Poly, poly," and that means slowly, slowly. And I think about that a lot of times. So you would do a rest step. So you would not try to walk as fast as you could or hike as fast as you could, but you would shift your weight and take a rest. And that actually helped you with your breathing and your pacing and all of that. And I think about that a lot of times when I'm trying to reach another goal and I'm just going too fast. It's like, maybe if you poly, you might actually get there faster, which reminds me of the tortoise and the hare too. But again, other people's toil and sweat helps us for sure. Now this is, we hiked along the edge of this. It's called the Western Breach. So that definitely looks a lot more ominous than that other picture. So we were walking along the face of that. And then around this other side, we come up to the summit. And so this is another one of our camps, was very rocky and a very kind of unusual setting. And of course, we're up above any kind of trees. There's no plant life at this point. You actually go through, I think it is 6 or maybe 7 zones, terrestrial zones, as you go up this mountain. That is kind of hard to see, but you can see this. So this is a wall. It's called Barranco Wall, and you have to basically climb it, often like 4-point climbing, where you have hands and feet on the wall, and you can see the little tiny dots of color here. That's the porters with the baggage going up that wall. And this is us getting ready to climb up these rocks and get up there. Then we're at you can see the terrain here is just nothing but rocks. Again, we're up above the clouds, kind of taking it all in. And Daniel here's father had Parkinson, so we had connected with him and did some charity work with him after we came back. That's our tents again at the top. This is where we're about to, that's me. And this is John with his little orange hat. And this is our porter August. And we're about to hit the high camp, where you don't really sleep. You take a little nap for about 2 hours, and then you get up at midnight and start to climb to the summit. So they're still bringing all our stuff. That's looking back down the mountain a bit. And that's me at the high camp. So that's 15,500 feet. And at that stage, I was still, feeling pretty good. I didn't feel like I was lacking oxygen, but we did have some people at this point who were starting to really feel the effects of the altitude. I mean, John and I were fortunate because we lived in Colorado and we had been able to do a lot of high altitude training, not this high altitude, but we were better prepared from an oxygen saturation perspective. Then this is when we started out. All you can see, you start out at midnight, it's pitch black, and those are our squiggly little headlamps as you're sort of marching up the hill. And then John and I got to, there's a stopping off point, and this was where, it really shifted our perspective, because we looked at each other and I said, this was 9 years into John's diagnosis, and neither one of us ever imagined that 9 years after being diagnosed with Parkinson's, that we would be able to be on top of Mount Kilimanjaro. And not only that, we were the first people in our group up there, and that is John reaching out to catch the sunrise.
Mm.
It was just so amazing. And that is, you can see here, we're up on top of the mountain, and this is the curvature of the earth. It's the most amazing thing to see. So a lot of times when people climb these summits, they're nestled inside of other mountain peaks. And so Kilimanjaro is one of the few freestanding mountains where you can actually see the curvature of the earth from the peak. And then that's us at the top of the mountain. So it's 5,895 meters. I forget what that is in terms of feet, but it's 19,400 and something. And so, we came in groups. So John and I got there first. We did not wait for the other group. So these other groups actually started out before we did, because they were slower, and we passed them on the mountain and made it to the top as the faster group. And then we passed them on the way back down as well. So it was a little bit of a bummer that we didn't get to summit with them, but they had us actually divide into groups of our pacing. And so that's kind of where we ended up. And that's Sarah, who has MS. And she actually was in the group with John. So it was just Sarah and John and me and the photographer who were in that first group that made it to the top. So, and, when I think about climbing that mountain and finding a new perspective in whatever your challenges are, there's so much that we can do to change our own perspective, but also to understand somebody else's perspective. So what am I missing? I'm going to stop sharing and come back over here now. So 2 years after we did the climb, we came back together in Rocky Mountain National Park and came together and started talking about it. And a real epiphany for me was, you go on a trip like this and you think everybody's on the same trip I am. What? Everybody's not on the same trip you are. And we decided to write a book about climbing Mount Kilimanjaro, with each person writing a chapter about it. And so for the next year after that, I worked with an editor and pulled all the people's chapters together. And so we have a book. If you want to get it, it's on Amazon. It's called More Than a Mountain. And when I started reading those chapters, I was like, wow, these people are not on the same trip I was. And, we're all here on this earth, and we often get sort of stuck in our mindset that everybody else is on the same trip I am. And that's what keeps us from trying to understand each other. It keeps us from shifting the way we think about things, from thinking about, like, what am I missing? It can affect our ability to set bigger goals. And so, I just wanted to kind of put that out there and see if anybody has anything they want to share, or talk about things in your life that have changed your perspective, and see what you think.
Wow. Thank you, Martha. That was beautiful. Just beautiful.
Thank you, Martha.
Thanks,
Lad's here.
Hey, Lad, how are you?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
That was just inspiring. Oh my
That
goodness.
is inspiring.
Inspiring.
I mean, it was such an incredible trip because, so, like, one of the young women that went with us, so this little, people always ask me if it's a dancer. This is actually the leap of faith. So our book is More Than a Mountain, Our Leap of Faith. And it was the leap of faith journey. And an artist made this leap of faith to raise money for April, who was a young woman in her 30s with MS. And she probably was the most debilitated person in the group. And she made it to about 16,000 feet. She actually had to be carried off on a gurney because her pain got too bad. But, you know, I looked at, you know, like somebody like her and the strength it took to do that and what she accomplished. It didn't matter that she didn't make it all the way to the top. I mean, it was just an amazing accomplishment for her. And I think sometimes, like if we set a big goal and we don't get all the way there, we forget to kind of pat ourselves on the back for the accomplishments we made along the way. And so many of the people here have been working on their health and making strides and improvements every day, some little improvement. And, you know, we need to be grateful for those things and not get so focused on, you know, the top of the mountain, which is, you know, it's great to reach the top of that mountain. I mean, it was fantastic, but, you know, there's still a lot of victories along the way.
Really? Ah,
So now I've sent everyone into silence.
it is moving. It's really very moving to see that.
Yeah, that was.
And to just imagine doing it. And to do it with John. Tell us about John's response, feelings about it.
Oh, you know, John's like always the jokester. So he was keeping everyone in stitches all the way up. And even like the chapter in the book that he wrote is pretty funny. And it was also very funny to me because I have no idea what page in that book my chapter is. But anytime John gave somebody a copy of that book, he was like, I think he's on page 165. I can't remember, but he would always say page 165. You know, but along the way, you know, and I think about this too with his Parkinson's, like, you know, John he just never complains. Like he never complained about anything. He lost, like, I think he might've lost all of his toenails on the way down. I mean, it's, you know, the pounding of your toes going down. I mean, he didn't lose them all at once, but after we got back, but, you know, I'm sure it was just incredibly painful. If you were doing that kind of pounding that you could lose all your toenails in a couple of weeks. You know, he just never complained. You know, the other kind of interesting, I'll say a microbiome related, you know, so you're going up, you're not taking a shower for 7 days. So there's no showering or, you know, washing really at all. You're drinking very chalky water from the mountain streams. So it's got the milky high mineral content in the water. I mean, we used water purification tablets, but you know, the water was a very high mineral content. And John joked about all the water and then when we got back at the end and we got to our hotel to take our shower, and I mean, I'm not kidding you, like it was so hard to get the dirt off. I mean, we were just like washing and washing and washing. And of course, now I think about like what a healthy microbiome that was. I probably should have just left all that dirt on there and I could have been pig pen for the rest of my life.
Aw.
Did you use oxygen?
We did not use oxygen. They did have a few oxygen tanks with them, and we had one woman who had multiple sclerosis, but also had asthma, who did not make it to the top. And she was in distress at the high camp, and they had her on oxygen at the high camp.
Yeah. The air is thin up there.
It is very thin. And that for me, like I write about this in the book at about, it was probably about 16,500 feet. So not that much higher than the high camp, but about 1,000 feet higher. I thought, I'm not going to make it. So we had, you know, that 4,000 feet to climb that morning. And I was like, I don't know if I'm going to make it. And then I, of course, said to myself, like, I need to keep going because John needs me to keep going. Like, we're going to get each other. And that's also, frankly, why they paired you with a partner. Because, and I've said this before, we can't, I mean, you can get somewhere on your own, but it's a lot better if you have somebody at your side or right behind you or right in front of you, you know, encouraging you, or that you're saying, okay, I can't give up, because if I give up, he'll give up. And so, you know, I said this little prayer over and over and over that was my, you know, one of my mother's favorites. And but I felt my parents come beside me and carry me up the mountain. It was a very, very profound experience. And I also, for me, I'm not the best at trying to meditate, but that when you get above that 16,000 feet and you can't think about anything except breathing, which is kind of what meditation is trying to teach.
Yeah.
It's like meditate. I think I was like, oh, this is what meditation is. Because there's like nothing else clouds your mind except the next step and the next breath. And it's really powerful when you can clear all that clutter out of your mind.
So when you left at midnight, when did you when did you reach the top?
So it was 6 a.m.
So
it's-
daylight, right at,
So it's 6 hours for that last 4,000 feet.
in the dark.
Hush,
In the
hush,
dark.
hush. Guys, hush.
In the dark. Mostly in the dark. Yeah.
Wow.
But I mean, we had one woman who, I think she was in the group that started at about 10:30, and she didn't summit until I think 2:00.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was a long journey for some of the people.
Yeah.
I mean, just the fortitude of, you know, the different people in that. So the book is really interesting because you get these very, very different perspectives. And, you know, you're walking with these people every day and you're getting to know them and stuff. But we also realized when we came together 2 years later that we didn't really know each other, even though, you know, we had done this big, significant thing together. So again, that's sort of back to that perspective and, you know, learning to kind of shift your viewpoint to think about somebody else's perspective. I mean, there was one of the healthy climbers who actually probably could have made it to the top and chose not to. About part of the way up, she's an environmentalist, and she started thinking about, you know, the environmental burden of the tourism and the people on the mountain and all of that. And she said, no, I'm not going to summit. I mean, they do a really good job, I think, of taking care of this mountain. And it provides a great, you know, it does create a lot of economic benefit for the local economy and the people there. So, there are difficult trade-offs anytime we do those kinds of things. But again, that's another kind of change in perspective. So we went with a guide company, and at the end, there's a celebration at the end when you get to the bottom and everybody's singing and everything. But most of us gave some part of our climbing gear or coats, or, my boots were too small, but, gave the nicer gear to leave behind for the guides, because they don't have the financing and the guides and the money to buy, or the places to actually buy that kind of gear. And so, we also, left what we could for them for that.
Wow, Martha, I can't imagine that last 6 hours in the dark, coping with what the physical struggle of it and where your mind can go in the dark,
It can't go it goes nowhere but on your breath.
Really? Well, that's good to hear, because
Yeah.
otherwise, the dark, the difference between light and dark for just my mental attitude is amazing. But I guess if you're just actually kind of in a meditative state, you just keep going.
And, you have this little headlamp on that is shining the path directly in front of you. So it's getting all the distractions out of your mind and the focus on what's ahead of you, which is another great sort of metaphor for life. If you have a goal, like focus on the goal and don't let all this other stuff around you get in the way of that. But to be
What
honest,
about the stars? Maybe you had stars above you.
well, I did have stars above me, and I looked at those when I was in the camp laying down. But once you're on that upward march, you're not paying a whole lot of attention to the stars. But I bet they were beautiful that night, but I don't remember them at all, Paula.
Wow, Martha.
So how was it on the way down?
So that is a fantastic question, because for me, going down is horrible.
For
So
me too.
the pounding. So again, back to John's toes, and perspective again. Like, we think that like going up this incline is the hard part, but actually it's very difficult on the body physically to go
Yes.
downhill at this steep slope, because you're
Especially on your knees. Oh,
on
boy.
your knees and your
Yeah.
hip flexors. People don't think about, because your hip flexors are braking. They're your brakes. And one
Right.
of the gentlemen who had Parkinson's, actually, his medication stopped working on the way down, and he wasn't able to brake. And so two of the other gentlemen who were on the trip with us actually had to take him arm in arm to brake him. So like, I can't even imagine what that section during that end of the day that we summited, of them holding Nathan, who was a pretty big guy, trying to keep him from going, face forward down the mountain. But they, helped brake him all the way down to so we
Yeah.
stopped at an intermediate camp and spent the
Or
night.
if it's a winter, it's better. I will take it down on my butt.
Well,
Lie down.
it's there is a section in the upper part, in that 4,000-foot part, when you're coming down, that is actually full of what's called scree, and you can kind of ski. So we did do some what's called like scree skiing, where you're kind of sliding down, which was much easier. But then once we got back to the high camp and had to go the route down, you know, if you think about, we took 6 days to get up, and we took a really 1 day to get down. So half of the day that we summited and half a day the next day. And I was one of the last people to get into the camp at the end. So I made it to the top first, but going down for me was
Honestly, I think I screwed up my knees really good when we were hiking Telluride, from Telluride up in Colorado, and it was quite high. And it's so fun to go up, so much fun when the knees are working, of course, and you are not in pain. But when you get down, it was horrible. It was really bad.
And I think people don't, you know, don't really again, that's a perspective change when you do something like that, where you think that the hard part is the climbing.
No.
But physically on the body, there is just such
and not only physically, mentally as well.
Yeah.
Honestly, because when you go up, you discover stuff, you see this, or you go here and there, and on the way down, you just want to get back to the camp and have a beer and relax. Yeah.
We did. So John and our son Jack and I climbed Mount Elbert in Colorado when Jack was, I think he was probably 10 years old. And he didn't have a pair of hiking boots that fit him very well, because he was wearing, I think he was wearing one of Charlie's old sets of boots that was probably too big for him. And John, who's typically, you know, John was an Eagle Scout, so he was always very prepared for every adventure we went on. But for some reason on this one, he was not that well prepared, didn't bring enough water, didn't bring enough food. And after we got up to the summit, Jack got a terrible headache and was just in awful shape. And I was like, you need to get him down. And of course, me, because I don't go very fast down, I was like, you guys go, just go as fast as you can go, and I'll see you when I get there. And I think I was an hour and a half later, I came moseying down. But, you know, it's interesting with altitude because there's just a point that you get to if you have one of those altitude headaches and you drop down below a certain level, and all of a sudden it's gone and you feel fine.
I never felt the altitude, but people did. Yeah. I don't know why. Well,
I mean, it's so I've actually done a lot of investigation around the physiology of that altitude sickness you know, and I'll bet you there's a microbiome that is different for the Sherpas and the people who
it makes sense.
Work at that altitude all the time. And you know, I gotta think they have a very healthy glycocalyx, because that's what's sort of managing that oxygen nitrogen transaction that's going on. And of course, they know how to breathe better than most of us do. And you know, that's I really want to get somebody on here to talk to us about breathing. I did some breath work at the conference that I went to over the weekend, and that was pretty interesting too. And I know, like a lot of people probably, I mean, he's sort of faded from the limelight, but back during COVID, Wim Hof was quite popular with his breathing. And, you know, there's a lot of.
My favorite is the very simple one, 4-7-8. And you can mow on the exhaling. You can make a sound, and that's very soothing for me.
Well,
which one is your favorite?
That's one for also for helping you go to sleep. And then the 4-4-4 box breath, I think, is the one for also calming your nervous system.
Yeah. Those are Dr. Andrew Weil. Those are classic.
I need longer exhale. I really feel good with longer exhale. So 8 is my best number. I think it's personal again. It's very personal thing, but it
There's
works like a charm.
those guys at the Oxygen Advantage. Martha, are you familiar with Patrick McCowan?
Yeah.
Those guys are amazing. I ran into them at the Health Optimization Summit last April, and boy, they really show you how to breathe into different parts of your lung. And you can tell based on the movement of your hands, if you're touching certain areas of your ribs or on, on your chest, where you may or may not be breathing well. And then there's some right left exercises you can do to see if you're
What?
yeah.
What's
Yeah.
that called again?
These guys are trained by the framework of the Oxygen Advantage. If you look that up, it's a book. I have the book from long
What
ago.
are they selling? Usually it's what are they selling?
They're teaching people how to
How to
do that,
breathe.
how to
How
yeah,
to breathe.
mhm,
Okay.
mhm. And it just has to do with using like oxygen utilization. So making the most of the oxygen and CO2 balance. And
But how do you breathe in from left and right? This is weird.
it
Can you?
probably has to do with your posture. Yeah, you can
Yeah.
identify, malalignment and
Huh. You have to teach us to do this. So
I'm
what
not
are the
trained in it,
benefits
but
of this?
yeah,
Yeah.
there are, everything, right? Oxygen utilization, how
But why?
efficient are
Usually
you?
people want to involve the whole body. I mean, why involve the
Mhm.
left side instead of the right or the other way around? I mean, what
That's
will
a
be the
small piece of
benefit?
it. The right left is just a kind of an interesting detail, but the overall gist is to use oxygen better. So,
Oh, yeah.
being efficient.
I think what she's saying, Paula, is that they can recognize if you're not breathing evenly.
To correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Not teaching you to breathe
Yeah,
out of one lung or
that
the
is
other.
weird.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you think so, like if I were to think about, like John had his shoulder was often dropped, one of his shoulders. And if you have a dropped shoulder, that weight is pressing down on that lung.
Mm.
And so
Mhm.
you're getting compression where, you might not. So, just opening up your chest and having, looking at your posture when you breathe is going to
Yeah,
improve
gotcha.
also.
Mhm. So how is Parkinson and MS diagnosed? I wonder.
So I don't know about, well, MS, I think they do by an MRI because MS, they can see lesions in the myelin sheath. Parkinson's, there is not, so they're starting to have some clinical diagnostics. They have something now where they can, they do a skin biopsy to look for the alpha-synuclein. They also have something called a DAT scan that looks at dopamine transport in the brain, but those are not typically it's diagnosed by observation of there's something called the Uniform Parkinson's Disease UPDR, I forget, rating. And there are a lot of, they have you do fine motor skills,
Uh-huh.
walking. And so there's a scoring system that they use for that. But there are some sort of classic things they look for, which is maybe an arm not swinging, one or both of your arms not swinging, loss of facial expression, lack of or change in the fine motor
Coordination.
skill. But
Yeah.
there's not a, it's also been really interesting for me in this whole process with John of kind of being surprised that in neurology, they don't take blood work. So I think over the course of 20 some odd years going to a neurologist, maybe he had a blood draw once. It's not part of that routine care. And, given the indications now of the importance of the microbiome as a contributor to Parkinson's. I mean, there's clearly a metabolic component that is coming from the microbiome that I think
We'll recognize probably the
it's
disease.
unrecognized, and we could have had many decades of blood work data that would help us have better indications of
Yeah. Mhm.
what's going on there, but we don't. So that's also
So basically, they look at for your posture or motor skills, but people, I don't know, how is this definite again? I mean, some
well,
people,
there's a lot of misdiagnosis, and
yeah,
and there's a Parkinson's or Parkinsonism is, I mean, John used to call it the designer disease, because like everybody's got their own
Yeah.
design outfit on, and it's all a little bit different. This person may have these 3 things, and this person's got these 4 things, and there's only an overlap of these 2 things.
Right.
But it affects, I mean, there are a lot of non-motor skills that are not well recognized or dealt with. And that can be like vision. They consider constipation a non-motor skill, but it is a motor skill because the GI tract is a muscle.
Yeah.
But there's a young woman who has a podcast called The Secret Life of Parkinson's, she has early onset Parkinson's, and she just went through the DBS surgery to have the electrodes. And a lot of people were giving her a hard time. They were like, "You're so young. Why are you doing that now?" And she said, "Well, you can't see all of my symptoms. So stiffness or like real stiffness of the whole body is something that, like, if you were sitting on a screen like that, you might not notice that in somebody, or even if they're walking around, you might not really notice how stiff they are." So there are a lot of kind of pieces of the puzzle that are under recognized, and we're actually working on a docu-series talking to people with Parkinson's to help people better understand kind of what the whole picture, the whole person, the whole picture, the whole story, because there's a lot to it. And, it's been sort of relegated to, oh, it's this brain thing. Well, no, it's not. It's the whole body. And there's a whole lot we can do about it. And we don't have to just, and I say that, with any of these chronic health issues that we're dealing with, there's a lot you can do, and to, take action and take control and have a better outcome in your health.
Yeah.
And also, kind of back to my little pitch, involves changing your perspective and not picking up the perspective that, a doctor gave you, because that's sort of the standard perspective they give you on Parkinson's, because you don't have to be the standard.
Yeah. And probably the doctors are not recognizing it very well. If it's such a broad perspective, like you're saying, can be anything, not only the model. I don't know. I was wondering because of your husband, and I started reading about it, and I'm like, what? There's so many symptoms that you can have. And like you said, some people have this and that and that. Probably we're going to diagnose everybody here with Parkinson if we talk about this and that.
Well, there's a new book out by Dr. Ray Dorsey, who he's he wrote the book Ending Parkinson's, but his new book is The Parkinson's Plan. And a good section of that book, he doesn't go into the microbiome very much. So he still needs to make his progress into the microbiome, but he talks a lot about total toxic burden and what we're being exposed to, whether that's different chemicals that impact Parkinson's and things in the food supply. And I think that's what is a starting point going along the way to say, okay, toxin exposure, and it can be a lot of different kinds of things, but that can impact our neurological systems, the whole
Oh,
body.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
a lot of that affects the microbiome too. So I think Sharon's got her hand up, but you'll have to unmute yourself, Sharon.
Trying. You can hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I came to this podcast late so if you already covered this, please forgive me and don't feel like you have to respond to the question. But
No worries.
okay, thanks. So about Parkinson's, I'm very interested in if there are natural ways to protect ourselves from Parkinson's, and that people could use if they're having symptoms of Parkinson's. There's an awful lot of drug-induced Parkinson's. When you watch TV, every other commercial is for like an antipsychotic drug that can cause Parkinson's. There's, like you were starting to mention, about the toxins, the glyphosate everywhere that causes Parkinson's, and many other environmental toxins. So I think you have mentioned possibly coming out with a product related to this, but I definitely would want to know about it. And I'm in healthcare, so it's something I would recommend to people if there was a natural way, since the drugs for Parkinson's leave a lot to be desired. They have a lot of side effects. They wear off. People can fall asleep in the middle of what they're doing. So if you already covered this, your inventions and what you have to offer in this, then I'll just listen to the podcast. But if not, I'm really interested in anything that you can share about this.
Okay, I didn't cover it tonight. I have talked about it somewhat. One thing I will say is Dr. Dorsey's new book, The Parkinson's Plan. He does have 25 kind of key things to do to protect yourself. And a lot of those involve, clean water, clean food, avoiding certain toxins that he's identified, like dry cleaning fluid and a number of these herbicides. One thing I will add to it that most people are not going to be aware of is essentially surfactants or household soaps and detergents, shampoos, anything that's like foaming, all of your liquid soaps, all of those surfactants damage the glycocalyx and they're immunosuppressant. And I believe they're one of like a hidden contributor to Parkinson's. We know that there's a lawsuit currently for the herbicide paraquat. Well, these surfactants they're what are called quaternary ammonium compounds. And that quat, so anything that has quat in the name is something you should avoid. But, like Dawn dish detergent or, your shampoos or liquid soaps, any of those, like just use a plain old bar of soap. And try to avoid that as much as you can. Also, a lot of these residues actually will cling to our glasses. And so then when you drink glass, the residue can be in the glass. I did make the Sugar Shift probiotic that I have. I made that for my husband, John, and he had some great benefits from that. His UPDR score after starting, it was after about a year, we were measuring his microbiome and watching it move back to a healthier human microbiome profile. And we measured that for about 120 days and could see that a lot of the pathogen load was decreasing and the beneficial microbes were increasing. And I made that for John. And I do get a lot of feedback from people that it helps with constipation. Constipation is a prodromal symptom. In Parkinson's, it can precede, like chronic constipation can precede a diagnosis of Parkinson's by 10 to 15 years. And if you think about, I don't think doctors, especially, you know, when they tell somebody if they're going every third day that that's okay. I think I said at the beginning, if your dog has not gone to the bathroom in 3 days, you probably have them at the vet. The same thing with us. When waste is sitting in the body, that increases the toxic burden that our body has to take care of. And so, you know, the bacteria produce what are called pore forming toxins, which means they can poke holes in our cells. And when they do that, the contents of the cells spill out. That's calcium and potassium, and it changes the electrolyte balance in the body, which is required to propagate the electrical signals that help us move. And so, you know, while somebody might think, oh, constipation doesn't have anything to do with the signal in my brain, it absolutely does. And so addressing constipation and addressing microbiome health and diet is a you know, a big part of that, I will say. And I have noted over the years of all the people that I have met and talked to with Parkinson's, there is often an addiction to sugar. And it takes, you know, a great force of willpower to get over that. But that sugar shift probiotic can also help with the sugar cravings.
That's
And
great. And
there is a
yes, go
probiotic,
ahead.
PS128, which is made by a company called Neurally, and they have done some clinical studies in Parkinson's with their probiotic. And then there's also there's another company, Microbiome Labs, that makes a product called HU58, and that is, I would say, like more of a target for specific gut pathogens. But that HU58 can also be beneficial in Parkinson's.
And did you say Neuralink for the probiotic PS128?
It's Neurally, Neurali, Neurally.
Okay, great. Thank you. And the sugar shift helping with the constipation, I was just thinking of potential mechanisms. Do you think that it's increasing the butyrate producing bacteria or stimulating the vagal nerve or improving nerve conduction in the enteric nervous system in the gut? Do you think that's how it does this, improving the constipation, or some other mechanism?
Well, I think, you know, first and foremost from our clinical, so we did a clinical trial, not in Parkinson's, we did a clinical trial in diabetes. And, you know, because there are a lot easier measures to do, but in the microbiome before and after, there was a significant increase in the number of butyrate producing bacteria. So increase in butyrate production and a return of kind of missing keystone species like what are Roseburia and a bacteria called Fecali prosnetii, and both of those are involved in butyrate production. And also an increase in bifidobacteria from that clinical trial. So we did see an increase in butyrate production. We also had a decrease in the gram-negative bacteria, which are those endotoxin producers. And we're working on a Parkinson's publication, and our hypothesis here is that a number of these gram-negative bacteria produce an enzyme called urease that kills the good bacteria. They spill their contents of calcium and potassium, and that's what makes a concrete-like stool. And so as you start to shift that microbiome and get rid of those endotoxin producers that are making the urease, you have less of the bad guys to kill the good guys. And so that starts to stop that process of making the concrete stool over time. And then when you don't have that calcium potassium spilling, you don't get that interference in the signal in the enteric nervous system and the vagus nerve.
That's great. And one last question. Did John take one sugar shift twice a day, or what dose did John take for his benefits?
Yeah, he took one in the morning and one in the evening.
Okay. Okay, great. Thanks very much. Very interesting.
Martha,
Thank you.
can I add that, Sharon, I think you could read, go to Martha's Quest. Is it marthasquest.com?
Yes, Martha's Quest.
Martha's,
It is. Yeah, let me double check.
and
Yes,
Martha,
marthasquest.com.
yes, and Martha writes a blog on there that is very informative and answers your question in 100 different ways. Wouldn't you say, about things that can be done? So that's a really good place to start.
And I do include a lot of alternative things like, John did Qigong, and he was also very involved in the cycling program where they showed that riding a bike for 80 to 90 RPMs, that pace for 1 hour, 3 times a week could reduce the symptoms of Parkinson's by up to 35%. And I think that is in part, involved in the breathing and the oxygenation, and also what it does for the mitochondria, that kind of exercise. But it's also interesting because I have started to dig a little bit deeper. John was a marathon runner, and I've talked to a number of, it's certainly not the majority, but quite a few people that I've talked to over the years with Parkinson's were endurance athletes, particularly runners. And this is something that when you're doing a long distance run, you are putting a stressor, a pounding stressor burden on the body, for one, which creates a tremendous amount of stress. But you're also pulling all the blood out of the stomach and the blood vessels around the stomach into the muscles to deal with what the muscles need to do that kind of endurance athletics. And then what happens when you come back from this long exercise, you get the blood rushing back into those vessels, and you get what's called reperfusion injury. And they know a lot about that from strokes, because that's part of what the problem is with a stroke, is when the blood comes back in, you get reperfusion injury. And over time, people who do endurance athletics, that damages the barrier of the gut lining, that reperfusion injury. And that's also where the endotoxin from those gram-negative bacteria can pass over into the bloodstream and really go anywhere. But, that endotoxin is causing inflammation. And endotoxin, or LPS, kind of goes by both names, but that's used in a lot of animal models of inflammation. So for diabetes, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's models, depression. And, when you start to okay, so let's look at those 4: diabetes, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, depression. Parkinson's can have aspects of each of those in that designer makeup of Parkinson's. About 40% of people with Parkinson's have some kind of insulin resistance. Some percentage of people may have, cognitive impairment. And, some percentage of people have depression. So it's just endotoxin in different parts of the body causing inflammation and problems. So when I talk to people about exercise, and John was very involved in the biking program, I think exercise is very important to our health, but exercise wisely and with caution. Like, don't feel like you need to be training, pounding the pavement to run the next marathon, because that may actually be doing you more damage in the long run than sitting. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It does. It does. Hey, Martha, you mentioned HU 58.
Yes.
Okay, I just bought this. Well,
I
yeah,
think it's Bacillus subtilis. And
it is.
you know, yeah, and we have a Bacillus subtilis in our sugar shift, but sometimes people maybe want to do, they might
Well,
want
Davis actually, Dr. Davis included it in his SIBO
yeah, he's switched it out. So,
regimen. Yeah, yeah.
do you have another question, Sharon?
Sorry.
No,
Unmute. Can you hear me?
I
I
can't.
don't know. Okay, good. No, I don't have another question, but well, maybe I do actually, because you just mentioned depression, and and that is something that I know is very prevalent in Parkinsonism, and the depletion of dopamine affects, so many body systems in the brain and peripherally. And it is also part of aging. So maybe this has much broader ramifications. I'm wondering if you're thinking that you might be able to create a product that may actually help with the depletion of dopamine. Given all the clues you're bringing up, I think that would be such an amazing contribution to the world if you ever could discover something like that.
Well, I think one of the big contributors to that is actually H. pylori, and which is, in the small intestine often. And it actually eats dopamine. So if you think about that, and I think it was researchers from Harvard, if I'm not wrong, who showed basically that. So sometimes people on the dopamine medication will start to have more off time, or even the medication won't work. And if they have H. pylori, that bacteria is eating the medicine, and then the more medicine you feed it, the more H. pylori you get, because it can metabolize that medication. And it's also interesting to me because I met a gentleman at the conference I was at this past weekend who has a company that has a at-home kit. I forget the name of it, but it's a 3-hour measurement that you go through, and it measures all 3 gases of SIBO. And John, his doctor wrote a test for him to go to LabCorp, and they did the H. pylori test, but it's only 30 minutes. And if you look at the growth curve of these bacteria, it's typically takes at least 30 minutes for them to start to grow and produce the gases. And so, I would say I recommend for people who want to look at that to do one of those tests that is a longer term 3-hour test, because you're measuring after that, after the meal, or what they have you drink, you're measuring at longer time intervals so that you can really get a picture of what's going on, because otherwise that 30-minute test that you get at LabCorp is just really insufficient for that. And what I will say is I do believe that sugar shift has an impact on SIBO. There are a number of people who do the SIBO yogurt separately, but there are people who have benefits with it aside from that. And I think it might have been before you got on here, but I was talking about a finding I had from a podcast I was listening to last night, that mannitol, which sugar shift converts glucose and fructose into mannitol, but many of the pathogenic bacteria cannot use mannitol to grow. I mean, they don't use it. but the good bacteria do. So you get that shift in the profile of the beneficial microbes from sugar shift. But it's not a perfect magic bullet to that, but I do think it is definitely part of the toolbox.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and especially because, Parkinson occurs more with aging, and also with aging, there's all other kind of factors that could increase the, bacteria like H. pylori, like hypochlorhydria. I'm wondering if this may also help compensate for that in older people.
Well, so I have some thoughts on that. I need to figure out how to do some kind of a scientific experiment to figure out if it's accurate. But what I'll say, so sugar shift, the formula is very much like a fermented food. So one of the strains that is in there is a strain of bacteria called Leuconostoc mesenteroides. And Leuconostoc is found in many fermented foods around the world. And it's actually the first microbe in the fermentation that grows. And it acidifies the environment for the lactic acid bacteria and removes the oxygen. So I do think that it is probably helping the acidic environment of the stomach, but I don't know. I haven't really thought about how to test that, but it's kind of an interesting area, I think, that could warrant trying to figure out how to test that. But I always recommend to people my fire cider, which will definitely acidify your stomach. It's a fermented concoction. I have a recipe for it on the website, but it's like ginger, horseradish, turmeric, garlic, onions. I put rosemary and thyme in it. It has lemons. It has apple cider vinegar, hot peppers. I don't know. I may have missed honey. It has a little bit of honey in it, and a little bit of distilled water. I think that might be all, but it's quite a concoction, and you ferment it for about 6 weeks, and then you strain all those goodies out of it and just take a shot of that before you eat or after you eat. But that will acidify your stomach and help. But that the low stomach acid is really, really underappreciated in its connection to Parkinson's, and because the stomach acid is really where the pathogenic bacteria are supposed to be killed. And a number of the good lactic acid bacteria can survive that, but the pathogens are supposed to be knocked out. But if your stomach pH is not a 2, you're not going to knock those pathogens out. And so, like, I think about, we talk about the colonic bacteria coming up and colonizing, but it can also be because we're eating and we don't have enough stomach acid to kill the bad bacteria, and they're coming from our mouth and from the food and not getting taken care of in the stomach like they should be. So, betaine HCl is, something people can also take to help with that. And, we have talked about bringing some other types of products to market, but right now we're still pretty much focused on our probiotics.
Great. Okay, thank you. That's very informative. And I'm going to listen to this podcast again, too, so I can really, really learn everything, all the rich content that you're sharing tonight.
Well, thank you for joining us. And I think we're a little bit over our time. And I'm also, thank you all for indulging me and letting me do my little Kilimanjaro shtick. But it was a nice memory for me. And I think also just a nice reminder for us all to before we kind of point at somebody and say you or blah blah blah, to think about like changing our perspective and walking in somebody else's shoes, or just taking a day and, you know, on that mountain, one day is different, how your perspective changed in one day. So maybe don't always react and say what you think immediately to somebody you disagree with. Maybe stop and think about it for at least a few minutes, but maybe even a day. And like if we could all start to think about things in a new way, in a new perspective, we might get better at talking to each other again and rebuilding our communities and helping each other get up the mountain.
So cool.
Yeah.
Martha.
And love people. Just love people. Don't hate anybody.
Yes, just love people. That's what we're here for. Just love people. And I love all of you. And I'm so glad that you joined
We
me.
love you. We love
Thank
you.
you. Thank you, Martha, for all of this tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'll see you